The kettle had just begun to tremble on the stove when my son came through the mudroom door without taking off his boots. There was wet clay on the floor behind him, and his hat was crushed between both hands. He looked at me once, then toward the stairs and said, "Dad, she's been crying since before daylight." I remember the heat from the stove on one side of my face and the cold air still coming through the open door on the other. I did not know then that the next few minutes would change the way our whole family spoke to one another. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of a household that has known good years and hard ones. I share these stories because life inside a plain community is still life. We carry faith, duty, pride, fear, and love just as any family does. If you have ever watched a family misunderstanding grow larger because everyone thought silence was safer, I would like to hear what you learned from it. My son Samuel had been married to Anna for a little more than 3 years. They lived in the small house across our north field, the one my brothers and I raised in 6 working days after the foundation was laid. It had 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a porch that faced the maple trees. Samuel worked beside me in the cabinet shop most mornings. Anna kept their home, tended a large garden, and helped my wife Ruth with preserving in late summer. From the outside, they appeared settled. They came to Sunday gatherings together. They sat at our table most Wednesday evenings. Samuel laughed easily, and Anna had a quiet way of noticing who needed more coffee before they asked. I believed that meant they were doing well. That was my first mistake. I had mistaken quietness for peace. Samuel stood in our kitchen that morning with rainwater darkening the shoulders of his coat. He told me Anna had barely spoken for 2 days. When he asked what was wrong, she said she was tired. When he pressed again, she began to cry. He did not know what to do, so he came for me. I asked whether they had argued. He said no. I asked whether money was short. He said they had enough. I asked whether she was ill. He said he did not think so. Then I asked the question I should have asked first. What does she say she needs? Samuel looked down at the hat in his hands. She says no one listens long enough to know. Those words did not sound like Anna alone. They sounded like something that had been gathering. Ruth had come into the kitchen by then. She placed the kettle away from the hottest part of the stove and looked at both of us. My wife has never needed many words to make a room honest. She said, "Do not go over there to defend him." That was the only warning she gave me. The rain had softened to a mist when Samuel and I crossed the field. The ground pulled at our boots. Neither of us spoke. At their house, a lamp was burning, though it was already morning. Anna sat at the kitchen table with a folded dish towel in her lap. Her eyes were swollen. There was a cup of tea beside her that had gone untouched. Samuel moved toward her, but she raised one hand, not sharply, just enough to ask for space. I took the chair across from her. Samuel sat near the stove. For a while, all I could hear was the clock above the pantry door and water dripping from my coat onto the floorboards. I told Anna I had come to listen. She looked at me and asked, "Will you listen even if it is about you?" I said yes. It is easy for a man to promise that before he knows what he will hear. Anna began slowly. She said Samuel had been taking extra work in the shop. He left before breakfast some mornings and returned after supper. When she asked him to stay home one evening, he told her the family needed the money. When she said she needed his help, he answered that women in our family had always managed their homes without complaint. I felt those words before I understood them. They were mine. Not spoken that week. Not even spoken to Anna, but spoken often enough in Samuel's hearing when he was a boy. I had said them about my mother. I had said them about Ruth. I had said them whenever a woman's work was discussed, as though endurance proved that the work was not heavy. Anna told us she was expecting a child. Samuel lifted his head so quickly his chair creaked against the floor. She had known for several weeks. She had wanted to tell him in a quiet moment, but there had been no quiet moment. She had been sick most mornings. She had nearly fainted while carrying water from the pump. 2 days earlier, she had asked Samuel again to stay home, and he had answered that his father expected the walnut cabinets finished before Friday. That was true. I had expected it. Then Anna said the words that broke something open in our family. "I am not afraid of the baby. I am afraid that in this family, needing help is treated like failing." No one spoke. Samuel's face changed first. He looked wounded, then ashamed, then confused. He said he had only been trying to provide. His voice grew louder. Anna's shoulders tightened. I could feel the room beginning to divide into sides. That is how families break, not always through one terrible act, sometimes through a room where every person is defending a good intention while refusing to look at the harm it caused. Samuel said the shop orders were necessary. Anna said she understood. Samuel said he had not known she was expecting. Anna said she had tried to find a moment to tell him. He said she should have simply said it. She answered that she should not have needed a child inside her before her exhaustion mattered. That sentence landed hard. I wanted to tell her Samuel was a good husband. He was. I wanted to explain that the winter had been lean and the spring orders mattered. They did. I wanted to say our way of life requires sacrifice. It does. But Ruth's warning was still with me. Do not go over there to defend him. So I did something that did not come naturally to me then. I asked Anna to tell us everything without interruption. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes. She told us how small comments had accumulated. Samuel asking why the bread was late when she had spent the morning helping a neighbor. Me praising Samuel for working 12 hours while never asking how long Anna's day had been. Ruth and I assuming they would come whenever we called because they were young and had no children. The women at gatherings asking when a baby would come, as though she controlled the answer. Samuel making decisions about shop hours, purchases, and visits before mentioning them to her because he believed a husband should already know what was best. None of these things sounded large when separated. Together they had made her feel invisible in her own marriage. When she finished, Samuel covered his face with both hands. He did not cry. He sat very still. I told him to look at his wife. He did. Then I told him something I wish my own father had told me earlier. Providing for a household is not only bringing money through the door, it is also noticing what your presence costs when you are never there. A full pantry does not make a wife feel safe if she must carry every fear alone. Samuel asked Anna what she needed from him that day. She said she needed him to stay home, not forever, not to leave the shop, just to stay beside her, hear the midwife's advice, and help make a plan before the next week began. He agreed. Then she looked at me. She said she needed me to stop treating every order as an emergency. She needed me to remember that Samuel was building a marriage, not only furniture. That was harder for me to hear than I expected. The cabinet shop had fed our household for years. Orders meant security. Delays meant uncertainty. I had built much of my identity around being the man who kept work moving and bills paid. I believe pressure made sons dependable. But pressure can also teach a son to ignore everything that cannot be measured in board feet, hours, or dollars. I told Anna she was right. Those were not easy words. They were necessary ones. The family did break that morning, but not in the way the title of this story may have led you to think. What broke was the old agreement we had never spoken aloud. The agreement that men would decide, women would endure, and silence would be mistaken for harmony. Breaking that agreement caused pain. Samuel did not return to the shop for 3 days. One of our customers became angry when his cabinets were delayed. My brother said I was becoming soft. At the next family supper, Samuel corrected me when I volunteered Anna to help Ruth with canning. I felt embarrassed in front of everyone. I answered him sharply. He left the table before dessert. For several weeks, our family felt less peaceful than before, but we were more honest. Samuel and I changed the shop schedule. We began ending work at a set time, 3 evenings each week. If an order required more hours, we discussed it with our wives before promising a delivery date. That was uncomfortable at first. I had spent years believing consultation weakened authority. I came to understand that authority without listening becomes loneliness for everyone beneath it. Ruth also told me things she had kept quiet. She reminded me of the winter our 3rd child was born, when I accepted work in another district and left her alone for 11 days. She told me she had forgiven me long ago, but she had never forgotten how certain I sounded when I explained why the work mattered more than her fear. I could not repair that winter. I could only stop repeating it through my son. Anna gave birth to a daughter late that autumn. The labor began in the night while wind pressed rain against their windows. Samuel sent for the midwife, then came for Ruth. I stayed outside their house for most of the night, sitting on the porch bench under a wool blanket. Near sunrise, Samuel stepped outside. His face was pale and his eyes were wet. He told me both mother and child were well. Then he sat beside me. For a minute, we watched the sky lighten above the wet fields. He said, "I almost became the kind of husband who never knew his wife was lonely." I answered, "So did I." That was all we said. Today, Anna is still quiet by nature, but I no longer assume quiet means contentment. Samuel still works hard, but he has learned that coming home is part of the work. Their marriage is not perfect, and neither is mine. We still misunderstand one another. We still become proud. We still sometimes listen only long enough to prepare our answer. The difference is that silence no longer receives automatic respect in our family. We ask what is underneath it. What I understand now is simple. A family can look orderly while one person is carrying more than anyone knows. Tradition can give a household strength, but tradition should never become an excuse not to notice pain. A husband does not lose his place by listening. A father does not lose authority by admitting he taught his son something wrong. Sometimes the words that seem to break a family are the first words honest enough to rebuild it. Thank you for hearing this part of my life. If you value plain, honest stories about marriage, faith, work, and family inside the Amish community, you are welcome to subscribe. And I would like to ask you one question. Has someone in your family ever said something painful that later became the beginning of real change?